to my live stream recording. Today we're going to be drawing a llama. This live stream was recorded with users from all across the United States, and I just go into the basics of how to construct form, how to light form, some things such as texture, lines, soft versus sharp, things of that sort. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's jump right in. So the first thing I try to do is really look at the broadest possible picture. So I'm conceiving of this guy's head as being, let's say it is a cube attached to another cube. So I'll kind of like feel my way around that to begin with. And then as I kind of develop a sense of that inner cube of, like, let's say the skull, and then the outer cube of the nasal region and the jaw, what I'm doing is I'm thinking in terms of geometric essence. And the geometric essence of the form is the thing it's ever present in my mind as I'm working. And it's worth a blowout sketch where I'll come on the side and I'll, like, let's say I'll zoom in and I'll do like a sort of like a pure geometry study. And what I think of when I think of that area of the muzzle, so the nose to mouth, is I think of a cube on its side, bit of an angle, and then the skull is like more or less perfectly upright. So every time I draw, no matter what it is that I'm drawing, I'm always reducing everything to its basic geometric essence. I try not to focus on, like, let's say he's got a funny smirk at the corner of his mouth. Let's say the llama has like some kind of like fun, like fluffy hair on the top of his head. I really try to not focus on that, but instead I try to really just close one eye and squint and look at the thing and say, okay, what can I force this thing to be? So if, like, instead of seeing like again, that mouth that it kind of has, I don't know, he has like a bit of like a smile at the corner of his lips, and I know I'm anthropomorphizing this and making it like a little bit human, but really, like, it feels like almost like a surfer or some kind of snowboarder who's just like, yeah, man. That's what I see. And so instead of seeing that mouth as being like, so let's say realistic, I just want to see it as a tiny slit. Now, as I work on a small little blowout section, I also keep my eye on the bigger picture. I don't want to like hyper focus on one thing. So I kind of go in close. I develop, what we could call, could be called a blowout because I'm really reducing it, but it could also be called a thumbnail. So I'll look at the picture. And as I'm looking at the picture, I double back to my little blowout, and then I look at my large kind of like massing in. And so it's kind of this back and forth of the forest, the trees, the forest, the trees. So I try to look at the forest, the big picture, and then I go into some of the specifics, not many, but the specifics, let's say, of the neck. So the neck right here, I'm conceiving of this as being somewhat like it's like a chopped cylinder. So it's a cylinder that's just had a slice off the top. Could also be thought of as being like a lampshade or something of that sort. And that suffices for the neck for right now. And so I want to give myself a little bit of room. So I'm just going to like kind of feather the end of that. And I feel pretty confident that the blowout summarizes my goals for the larger drawing. So now I can see the path that I want to take with the specific plane changes. So I'm starting at like this guy's funny kind of like teenager hairdo where his hair is hanging over his eyes, and it sounds like I'm being critical as a 42-year-old. Well, when I was 18, I had hair hanging over my eyes as well, and if I could grow my hair longer, I might still have hair over my eyes. So the bone of the nose leading to the nostril, and then you can actually like feel your upper lip. And I know it sounds like a funny activity, but like when you think of something as far-reaching as a llama, almost as being in human terms. So it is it is a little strange to say like, oh, the llama has similarities, but it does. The skeleton of a llama, when you look at it, it's a stretched and skewed version of the human skeleton. So like, of course, I'm artistically stretching here, but that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm stretching my mind so that I can see comparisons, so that I can kind of place it in terms that I can relate to. So now I just have the turn of the upper lip. I'm going to really focus on, okay, where does the mouth, the corner of the mouth fall? It kind of falls right below the hairline that I established above. So I run my lines like up and down so that I could compare things. So I'm always doing that in my drawings. Now it's a good time to go to some internal information. I don't always finish like a complete outline of something. I'll jump to inside information. And so now I have the lip masked in on the top, and it's time for me to get that lip on the bottom. So I just kind of like plod along and generally map things out. I know that a lot of this is going to change, so I take the pressure off of myself. I'm never in a place where I'm, I don't know, committing to an area and then saying to myself like, oh, like this is the chin and I have to get it 100% right the first time. Like if I do, well done, bravo. But if I don't, who cares? So these are like kind of like my experimental first thoughts with the awareness that it's almost like wet clay. Like I can like mold and shape everything on here so that it conforms to a better vision, maybe that develops like further down the road. So I jump around in my drawing intentionally quite a bit because I find like, let's say where the neck meets the jaw, that actually influences where I land the eye, let's say, or where I land the ear above. And using that whole reduction that we had above with the geometric essence, I just see the ear as being like pretty triangular. And then again, I don't know if the term triangulation works, but I almost like triangulate. Like I use like a lot of little bits of information to then say like, okay, well, if the triangle of that ear is over here, then the triangle of this ear, it's back by this much. And I'm just using my eye and letting my eye kind of like make the ratio calls. I know that I'm not going to get this exact my first go, but the more information I put down, the better a guess I will have. And so that's a rough map out right there. The back of the head, I really don't have to at this point be too specific. So I just kind of generally trace out something. So I use the eraser at this point, and I'll really be just like tidying up. So there are all these like what I call searching marks. And the searching marks come early on, and then as you get a rough idea and everything's proportionately looking like pretty decent, I just start tidying up a little bit so that I have a better understanding of where I'm landing. So I feel pretty good with this outline. So the eye right here, I want to place this eye, but the question is, okay, where? Like, how do you land that? And so I'm going to show you how you can use something, like let's say on a horizontal plane, and you can glide over. You can say, okay, the eye is not over from the nostril, but it's over and up. So I'll glide over from that nostril, but then you see how much further up you have to go. At least now you have like a reference point. So I'll use like the corner of like the hair where it meets the bridge of the nose and the corner of the nostril. And it's almost like I'm using 2 points to reference the third point, if you see what I mean. So I do this all the time in drawing. And it's very, it's intentional. That's why I like to get as much information down as quickly as I can so that I can use something like a string. So a string can be used to plot true horizontals and true verticals. And if you ever shoot a bow and arrow, a BB gun, a rifle, shotgun, anything like that, if you use something that has a sight, such as with a rifle, you get a true horizontal and a true vertical in the sight. We call it the hunter's crosshairs. So I do that in my drawings. I say like, okay, the corner of the ear is more or less the beginning of the eye-ish, not exactly. But that plumb line that I was holding in my hand helps me to establish these things. So whenever you're doing a detail that seemingly is floating in the middle of nothing, just tether it to something so that you can say, okay, it's triangulated off of this point and that point. You could throw in a third or a fourth point, and that's how you can land it more or less. Again, I repeat myself a lot, but I think it's worth mentioning that all of this is wet clay. All of this can be moved around. I didn't know that when I first started to draw. So if I plotted something like this incorrectly, I used to get really annoyed at myself. And it really took the joy out of drawing and painting. But then as I went further along, I learned to just kind of just roll with it and just be like, hey, that was my best guess. And so carry on. So it really loosened up my entire approach to do that. So I like to get a clear image of what it is that I'm actually drawing. And so I just move this down a little bit. And I just want to see the eye in a little bit more detail. So getting a bit more specific, as you can see. Now, one of the things I go for in my drawings is if the reference doesn't give me information, I don't really search for it per se. I will somewhat zoom in, but not a terrible amount. Because if that eye is in darkness, like why would I fight to see crazy amounts of information? In my opinion, that's when drawings and paintings start to look pretty false. When people are striving for information that isn't quite there. So for my drawing right now, because I don't have a live llama in my studio to reference, and because I'm at the mercy of this image, graciously provided by Wikimedia Commons, I'm just going to let it kind of exist as like somewhat of a dark shadow. And then I know from time that I spent in South America, I spent a fair amount of time in Bolivia and Peru and the deserts of Chile. And I actually saw alpaca and guanacos there. I actually saw a lot of them. I took a Jeep and my wife and I went deep into the deserts when we first got married. It's a lot of fun. And the eye can almost feel like a horse's eye. Maybe not quite as big. I can't remember exactly. But so I know there's that like pretty massive spherical shape in there. And so I'm just going to kind of embed that and then walk away from it. So in my studies in Italy, one of the things that I learned was I learned to just draw what my eye was provided with and not overreach. So as I work, I try to if something is in shadow, not try to coax it into high information. And that was something, I mean, I have to say I was really influenced by the Italians in this regard, in that they understood way better than I did that a drawing or a painting, the aesthetics of a drawing or a painting, if you try to render information, let's say in a deep dark shadow, it's not the way that your eye naturally sees. So I let a lot of information go on purpose so that I'm just not striving for something. And then if you let the information go, the interesting thing is that the piece actually takes on an atmosphere and a mystery that feels pretty natural. So now I'm just kind of like mapping out the general shadow shapes. I'm reinforcing where, like, let's say the shade of that nostril will fall the deepest and the darkest. I'm looking at my blowout sketch above to see where the plane forms change. I'm developing it further because I'm starting to feel the head as being somewhat of a hybrid between a cube and a sphere. I see the bottom jaw as kind of almost being somewhat blockish, but also has the shape of a cup. And it's at this stage when I start to mass in. So you can mass in with a pencil, just like this. Or if you sharpen your pencils on, let's say on sandpaper, you have a lot of extra graphite left over. So you can
use that graphite to really cover ground quickly. So I don't do this in all my drawings, but some big drawing that, we're doing on a live stream, I don't want to sit there for all eternity and render every single little hair. It just doesn't serve a purpose. That's just too much information. So what I do is I cover big areas quickly by smudging it with my fingers. And I was told when I first started to study drawing and painting in the United States, that was an absolute no-no, that you render each bit of information. And then as I started to, on my own, really research the Russian schools of painting, I have deep respect for a lot of contemporary Russian artists. One of them is Ivan Loganov. I have deep respect for the historic painters from Russia. So Ilya Repin is just one of my favorite artists. There's an artist, Nikolai Fechin. And these artists use blending stumps. They use their fingers. They used sharp charcoal. They used so many different things. Even Ivan Loganov even uses paintbrushes, which is really neat. But again, for me, it's about massing in big areas so that I could see the plane changes, so that I could feel the light landing on the form. I just want to feel it. I want to feel those things, but I want to feel them out kind of quickly, if that makes sense. Here's another approach. So I have a cigar holder, and I fill the cigar holder with graphite powder. It's really cool. So I use this graphite powder. I just kind of dump a little bit of graphite powder out and just hold it in the palm of my hand. And then I just dip my finger into that graphite, and it's a much softer, even more atmospheric way of rendering big pieces of information. So I can get that ear, like I can punch that quickly. Or if I had a pencil point, that would take me all eternity. There's a time and a place for everything. Sometimes you want to render it, but right now, big information quickly. I like the immediacy of drawings when they're done with graphite powder. I did a drawing during the lockdown in 2020. I did a drawing of an eastern black rhino. My friend works with a conservation group. And in doing that drawing of the eastern black rhino, what was neat, I used my fingers. The whole piece had this real flutter to it, this real animation. And it was cool because it felt like the rhino is charging at you like full steam. So there are virtues, there are trade-offs to everything. So you see how just dirty my hands get? So I just keep on going on. My finger itself is a drawing instrument. And so I'm just massing these things in, quickly putting all this information in, broadly putting all this information in. So now I have a pretty dark pencil. And that dark pencil, I'm just using it to punch the inside of the mouth. So I have no idea what the color is of the inside of a llama's mouth, but for what I can see here, the inside of a llama's mouth is quite black. Again, I could be wrong, but it looks like it's me, so I'm going to go for it. Again, that eye is pretty dark, so I'm just going to let that eye stay dark. And when you put in information with, like, let's say a soft pencil, you could also, if you're working charcoal, there's going to be a lot of like what I call peaks and valleys. There's going to be a lot of valleys on the paper that aren't filled in. So you're going to see almost like static with all this white showing through. But when you get the blending stump out, you can push the graphite into the valleys of the paper, so to speak. And then it just becomes richer, denser, fuller. So now that little divot in the front of the lip, again, the comparisons between our anatomy and the anatomy of this llama are pretty interesting because that little divot helps to turn the lip right there. So it gives it much more of a spherical feeling to it. I always look for anything I can do to heighten the geometric form of whatever it is I'm drawing or painting. So as a little side tip, if I'm drawing someone's arm, I will throw a shirt sleeve on it. I will throw a watch on it. Anything I can do to run around the form of that arm to show that, hey, the top of the arm, like let's say at the wrist area, is pretty flat, but then it turns pretty harsh. It's pretty cubical right there. Or if the sleeves are rolled up a little bit, then you could say, well, actually the arm on the upper part of the forearm is pretty round. So you could say, what the heck are you talking about? We're drawing a llama. Well, when I drew that divot in the lip, what I was really trying to do was to think of the roundness. So now I'm up at the top, and so I'm just like going to zoom in. I'm just going to minimize my blowout sketch right there. And I'm going to use the dark of the background to pop the light on the fur. So I want the front of the ear to feel like nice and fluffy. So I'm going to push the dark behind it. If you can see how I'm actually pitting the one against the other. And that's where I call this the visual foil. So in literature, there's a device called a foil. And so you can see it in the works of, like, let's say Shakespeare or Charles Dickens, where a very evil, gnarled, just depraved, older character that's just miserable and made all the wrong choices in life is put up against a young, innocent, sweet, tender, younger figure in Charles Dickens' work. And again, you could say, what the heck are you talking about? Well, in the visual arts, you can use a really dark background that's really almost like atmospheric and murky, but you can use that dark to pop the light off of the foreground. So it's, in a way, it's a visual foil in the same way that we have the literary foil that also exists in music. You can use just kind of quiet, low passages. They call it basso continuo in an orchestra. And it could be, let's say, like minor and have tension, but then you can have these bright sparkles of other instruments against that, like a piccolo or a violin soaring above it. So I pulled the eraser into the shadow, and then it popped the light on that ear. So I pit the one against the other. And I'm fairly happy with how that is, but I'm looking at the front, which is so fluffy, and then the back of the ear, which has it's much more informed by, let's say, the cartilage of the ear itself. And so it's really a soft line against the sharp line. And I'll reinforce some of the value on the inside of the ear because I don't want it to just melt into the scalp. All right. So now, what I want to do is I want to, let's say, focus on the climax. So if a climax on the piece is the eye, I'm just going to start putting in some information in general. And so I'm strengthening the dark of the eye right there. And then as I strengthen the dark of the eye, I'm also going to be thinking of the eyelid. And the eyelid has those really cool little, like, it's just hairs. I mean, it could be fur. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But it's these like light slashes of fur that like cut across the eye. And so you can use an eraser to, again, you can use the negative aspect of the eraser to actually create. So this is a mechanical eraser that I really like. I'm going to use that, and I'm actually going to cut into the dark by erasing into it. So again, it's almost as if I'm making a positive stroke with a negative blow, with no other way to put it. And so that is something that would have taken me forever if I tried to render that in reverse. But now it kind of feels like it's working. So I jump over, I try to develop the piece gradually all around. I don't just focus on, like, let's say, okay, I'm going to finish the ear. And the reason for that is I have to, like, I have to jump all around to bring the piece up because every moment in here is being informed by the next moment. So the ear tells me what's going on in the eye tells me what's going on in the nose. The values relate to each other. Okay, how dark is the eye? Well, it's compared to the corner of the mouth. How dark is the corner of the mouth? And so this is why I like working with immediacy. I don't believe in fast art. I'm not trying to advocate speed per se, but immediacy. I do like to bring a work through where all the parts are speaking to each other. And so a lot of my heroes in painting, as I've read about their lives, like John Singer Sargent, I read several times that he liked to bring a work kind of like over the finish line um, all together. So he didn't like finish the left eye and then render the right eye afterwards, but he kind of developed them all at the same time. So I try to do that when I work. I try to see the whole picture. And yes, if you're looking at my drawing and saying, I can't believe he's comparing himself to John Singer Sargent, you could say that that would be crazy. And so, no, I don't think I'm like John Singer Sargent drawing this llama, but I do find John Singer Sargent inspiring. So now I just start refining external details, the external contour. I just start pushing it. I start kind of asking more specific questions about general form, where things sit. And as I feel good about that, then what I do is I'll start like thinking how I can heighten the form. So in the photo of this llama, his upper lip goes straight across, but I've actually made mine with a slight bow to it. It kind of like arcs down. That's my way of heightening the sense that the lip is wrapping around the teeth and it's turning away towards the side of the head. I'll punch the dark value on the side of the mouth so that you can feel the light hitting the skull in general, the light hitting the head in general, but then the light being unable to pass into, let's say, like the inner recesses of the mouth. And that just gives it a strength of depth. So he hasn't shaved in a while. He's got some little hairs growing off there. I'm not going to do much with the neck, but I'm just going to indicate the location of the neck. And I'm right back at the eye. I will put, more often than not, I put a fair amount of attention into the eye. I'm drawn to that in my own work. If you, as an artist, are more concerned with the overall form, let's say you derive like strength in your works from like gesture, then you may want to diminish the eye and sacrifice the eye and the strength in, sacrifice the eye for the overall. But myself, I really will work on heightening the eye. So now I'm thinking a lot about the direction of the light hitting a sphere, let's say. So we know the light will hit the sphere, it'll be dark on the far side. Likewise, on that eye, the shadow is going to be on the far side of that eye. So I'll just strengthen that right there. And, this is where I start taking artistic license because it's not exactly what's taking place when you look at the picture, but I will strengthen the spherical aspect of that eye so that it just feels, round. And going in a little bit further on the upper eyelid, I think of that upper eyelid as almost being like, I don't know, like think of like an egg sitting in an egg cup and the way that cup just like wraps itself around the egg. I think of that with the upper eyelid and the lower eyelid, where I think of it as just being like, as housing a sphere beneath it. I know it sounds like incredibly redundant, but I think redundant things as they work because I need to think in very elementary terms. So pushing it along just a little further. I don't want the transitions to be too sharp around the nose. I kind of want them to be gentler. Thinking of the light coming in and how it's striking the form. And then just really blanketing the whole side plane of this. So this guy doesn't really feel like a llama yet, but that's where in a short time it's time to like start putting in some of the the fur. Again, if I'm using the wrong terms for this alpaca's coat, forgive me. I don't really know what I'm talking about in terms of the specific terminology. But I just start to see like generally, okay, if the plane break of the nose at the bony portion is severe up there, well then how does the gradual, the face meet the fur over here? And when I'm drawing something like this, like I'm kind of thinking in a way, I know it sounds really funny, but it's almost like a guy who has like mutton chops, like huge sideburns or something like that, like Johnny Cash style. It feels like that. So I'm aware that I'm always anthropomorphizing whatever it is I'm drawing is just my tendency. Maybe it's the generation that grew up with the brave little toaster, so you'll have to forgive me. But if for those that don't know the word anthropomorphizing, it's imbuing something that is not human with human characteristics. And so I'm giving this guy mutton chops like he's like some kind of laughing surfer dude with like these awesome sideburns. So I don't want to stray too far into the realm of bringing like human characteristics, but I can't help myself but seeing it in this guy's portrait. I think if I was drawing a jellyfish, there would be absolutely no characteristics like that, like this, that I would bring. But he, in the photo itself, he just has personality. And I think a lot of pet owners, we have a bunch of pets at my house. I have a really cool dog. I rescued her, and she has such a personality. She loves hunting. She goes out and she catches raccoons and possums. And the reason why she does that, I think, is because we also have 25 chickens. So our dog keeps the chickens safe. And even the chickens, I know I'm going to sound crazy here, but I'm a homeschool dad and I got a bunch of kids. And so I'm just going to embrace it. And even the chickens have personalities. They could be hilarious. Some of them will be very curious. Some of them will just be like absolute, just boring creatures that just hang out under a tree. Others are really brazen. So if you're a pet owner and you see these characteristics, to bring them out, it's kind of like the fun of like the animal kingdom. If you ever watch, it's a pretty intense program to watch. I don't recommend it for young viewers unless parents are nearby. But Chimp Empire is a pretty interesting program by, I believe the fellow's name is James Reed. I might have that wrong. But Chimp Empire, they highlight like all of the personality traits of each chimp. And it's fascinating to watch. So now that I have like big elements of this masked in, I'm really ready to start going into much more detail. This is the point in which during the podcast, I actually will accelerate things. So I'll work on the drawing for a while more. And I really start getting into precise detail. I don't necessarily see the utility of narrating every moment of the detail. So I'm going to put the sped up version on after I do like another like, I don't know, hour or 2 hours or something like that. And I'm going to attach it to the video so that you can see me just going in even closer, in even more detail. But before I go, get that corner of the mouth locked in. We have a muscle. It's almost like it could be thought of as being like a rope, and that rope closes and opens. And what it does is it pulls on the flesh band around the mouth, and that rope pulls, and that's what causes us to smile. And if you think of pulling a blanket on a bed or something, if you pulled it in one direction, the creases form at perpendicular angles. Likewise, that rope, when it's pulled, the crease of our flesh goes at a perpendicular angle. So you can feel like the pull of that rope on this guy's face. And so with that, that's the broad lay-in. The devil's in the details. Actually, I enjoy the details. And so I look forward to accelerating this drawing for you and bring it up to a faster level. Stay tuned for more drawings where once a week on my website, Classical Art at Home, I open up by invitation through Zoom a link where you can hop on and you can watch me draw. You can watch me sometimes paint. You can watch me just go through different projects. And it's a whole lot of fun to do. And I take requests from visitors to the call. So with that, classicalartathome.com. Thanks so much.